All right. Well, we want to thank you guys for showing up and coming. This is good. For those watching this video afterwards, some of you, in fact, most of you are actually going to need to get a criminal record check. You two don't, because you're minors, so that's not a thing. But if you are helping with children, you can come to me if you need to get a criminal record check, and we have things signed for that. Because before September, before like Awana kicks in and youth and whatnot, some of your things need to be upgraded. So just take note of that. We do have available at the church, and I think you guys have them at those books, those little booklets. What we're going to do today is we're going to walk through this whole document. Now, we're not going to read every word in this document. What I do want, and those watching online, these are available. If you have never worked in children's ministry here, this is absolutely mandatory that you have one of these, that you look. This is not just I don't want to. Yeah, nobody wants to sit and like talk about these things, because some of these things that we're going to talk about today are heavy and hard. But the reality is we must, because our desire is to protect our children. And we have certain policies and things in place that must happen before you guys can work with kids and stuff like that. And that even includes you two. As I'm assuming you guys are going to be in the nursery, right? Nursery stuff. So, yeah. The first thing I want to draw our attention to, just by way of kind of introduction, if you actually go to Ephesians chapter 4, what we taught, we are going to be in the Bible a little bit, but not a ton. But Ephesians chapter 4, Paul's writing more on the practical level of church. So he spent the first 3 chapters kind of walking through doctrine. Here's Jesus, here's why this matters, here's how that works. And then he goes into more of the practical aspect. And if you actually read chapter 4, starting in verse 11, he gave the apostles, the prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature, of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves, and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. What we know is God basically gave evangelists, teachers, the leadership, the role that he put the leadership in order to train and equip the saints. The saints are the believers in the local church to do the work, right? We need people willing to step in, to give up their time and their gifts to do the work. For what purpose? According to this text, so that we would learn doctrine, so that we would encourage one another to grow up, to mature. Ultimately, looking at verse 16, when each part is working properly, what happens? So when everyone's kind of working together, what happens is it makes the body grow and builds itself up in love. And so volunteers and people stepping into these various ministries are critical. So that's the desire of our heart. So that when it comes to, in particular, working with children, you can read through the text of Scripture and you can see how Jesus himself feels about children. There's one account where the disciples are kind of getting the children away. Remember that? They're like, no, this is, and Jesus rebukes his disciples and says, no, they need to come. Like, the children need to come. Jesus has a heart for children. And so we too at Gateway Bible Church have a heart for children's ministry. And when we say children's ministry, we're talking about working with anyone 18 and under, or 17 and under. 18, you're legally an adult. And so there's specific and certain rules and kind of regulations that go into how we work with children. And some of this is going to be a little bit difficult to walk through as we look at just kind of the realities of the world. We live in a sinful world that is not pursuing righteousness and the sinful heart of man kind of comes out. And so, in your little booklets that hopefully you'll pick up at the church or you guys have, you can jump over to, I was going to say verse 3. This is not a verse. You could jump over to page 3, looking at kind of just our policies here. Our desire in doing this ultimately is that we take as many steps as we possibly can to protect our children. That's our desire, to prevent any sort of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional. We want to remove all of that, all opportunities for that as much as we can. We're not perfect. There's holes, there's things there, but we do everything we can to protect our children, the most vulnerable of our society. And so all of that, everything that follows after that, this is how we're going to do that. These are the practical steps we take to protect our children. And so you can see there kind of in the screening, verification, recruiting, and training. I'm not reading everything. I do encourage you over the course of whatever, maybe read this whole thing. If you have questions afterwards or maybe even during, for those of you that are here, put your hand up, and happy to do that. So one of the things that we do, we have a screening committee, which is comprised of myself and Danny Selk and Jeff Williamson. And it is our job. So what happens is, if this is your first time ever working with children's ministry, you're going to fill out at the back. There's an application form with some questions on there. We want to hear your testimony, those types of things. And then what happens is you sit in front of the screening committee, and we chat with you just face to face to see what's going on. But one thing that we do is you can see there, we coordinate annual policy awareness and training sessions. That's today. This is our annual. We do this once a year. Specifically, it's mandatory for those who have never been involved in children's ministry before. You cannot step into children's ministry without taking this class or whatever. And it is very, very strongly recommended that every year you just have just as a general reminder of here's what this looks like. We also do criminal record checks and those types of things to make sure that we do our due diligence to make sure that everybody coming in has been checked. In order to step into children's ministry, you have to have been here, a regular adherent or a member for a year. That way, there's a few practical reasons, but we want to get to know you, you get to know us, and lots of what happens is if we make it difficult to step into children's ministry, anybody who desires maybe to abuse any children won't usually stick around. If it's hard to get access to children, they'll go find something else to do. So that's kind of why we have that 1 year thing in there. So you have to be either a member or an adherent in good standing. You have to complete the application form and criminal record check. That's kind of standard procedure in most churches or anything like that. Individuals who come back flagged from on a criminal record check, if there's a positive thing or anything like that, we will have more follow-up conversations about what's going on. They can only, on a criminal record check or what's the other one called? Vulnerable sector. Only so much information can be provided. So that's follow-up, but if there's a flag, that's likely going to mean that you're not going to step into children's ministry for various reasons. Obviously, we don't want to put that person in a situation where they could harm a child, and vice versa. So, as we already talked about, there is the 1 year rule that we have, and so there's that. Under kind of section, I'll at the partway through, I'll allow questions. Page 4, section 2 is where we're going to kind of keep jumping to. If you have any questions as I go, actually, just throw your hand up for you four, and I'll try to, as best as I can, answer those questions. We follow the 2 supervisor rule, which means that 2 approved children's ministry volunteers, one of which must be 18 or older. So this primarily applies to the nursery. So you can't have, so for example, Eloise and Lexi, you two would not be the only 2 workers in the nursery. right? You would have to have somebody who's over 18. Two could be in there together, but as long as there's somebody else who's over 18, then you guys could. So, and that's just as a safeguard there. It reduces the risk of any child abuse or anything like that. And it also gives backup if there's an accusation, but they can say, like the other people in the room can say that didn't actually happen. So there's just wisdom in having more people in there. Anytime that you are in any situation, you are to avoid at all costs any sort of one-on-one situations. If you find like being alone with a child is just a straight up no go. There are very, very few exceptions and minor caveats that are kind of in there. For example, when it comes to like more so in like the youth ministry as the kids are kind of a little bit older, you might find yourself in a one-on-one. For example, we have discipleship groups that meet together. But those disciples, so that's a one-on-one meeting. But there's a few rules that even come with that. One, that's primarily in a public place or in the home where there's a parent kind of around. And that meeting or that time together has been pre-approved by the parents. So, for example, Lexi, if you were in a discipleship relationship and someone wanted to come and say, hey, can I take Lexi for coffee? They would talk to your mom and I, and we'd say, yeah, you can go ahead. You can take Lexi and go to Tim Hortons, and you guys can sit down. But there might be a time there where you're one-on-one alone, but that's been pre-approved by your mom and I, and we're aware of that. But in all circumstances, in the vast majority of situations, you should always avoid one-on-one situations with children. Protection for you, it's a protection from them, protection for the church, it's a protection for their parents. It's just wise that way. When it comes to jumping over to kind of 2.5 here, once again, I'm not walking through everything. If there's a point that you're reading that you're like, oh, I'd like a question on that, just throw your hand up. 2.5, children must be signed in and released only to an authorized parent or authorized family member over 18 years of age. So, coming to our Sunday school program, you'll notice that you come in through the downstairs and there's a check-in person, right? And that person is sitting there and they take your name and then they also give you a rubber band, not a rubber band, but like a bracelet. And that bracelet is then connected to all of your children who also get bracelets. And so the only way to sign your kid in for Sunday school is to have that bracelet. And then the only way to get your children back is that your colored bracelet matches the colored bracelet of the kids that have that, so that's the only way. So for example, me, as I've been a pastor here for 11 years, and the nursery worker would not, I went downstairs to get my kids, but I didn't have the bracelet. And the the Sunday school worker, knowing me and knowing my kids, would not actually give me my kids. Because they're like, you don't have your bracelet. So I'm like, that's awesome. That's one of those ways that we can. So there's a pretty rigid, especially when it comes to children's, Sunday school, nursery, that check-in, check-out. That way we make sure that we're not releasing kids to people who are not authorized by the parents. So there's that. Any kind of field trips, this is jumping to number 3, any field trips, events, transportation. This primarily doesn't happen with our like nursery or Sunday school at this point. This is more geared to kind of that youth ministry. We do go overnight to some places. And there's we have waiver forms that parents need to sign. We have a lot of different things that happen. But they are pre-approved by the elder / pastor who is in charge there and ministry coordinator to ensure potential risks have been addressed. And so all of the time, we don't go away a lot. I think of one main time we go away, maybe 2 if we go on a snowboarding trip. But those are always there's a lot more work that has to go into making sure kids are safe, keeping the rules, and stuff like that. So any questions up to this point? Yes. That's different. Yep. Yep. Yes. Okay. Yep. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the question came back to 2.2 in your book. Um, I'll just read it. Where more than one room is being used for a program, a minimum of one adult worker or two youth workers who are over 16 are to be present in each room. So once again, we're going back to what we talked about a little bit. All classrooms, offices, hallways must have windows or doors with windows or doors left open, allowing easy viewing by parents and supervisors. Sightlines to remain unobstructed at all times. Everything is meant to be locked storage units, utility areas. If rooms must be unlocked, they will be monitored by cameras. So, in that scenario, in that circumstance, uh, we do have like every room that you use can be easily accessed. We do have cameras all throughout this building that can see into every single room. For Sunday school, our Sunday school intake person also will do just a walk and a look. But yeah, has to be two people, 16 or older, or at least one. No, that's a good. Um, yeah, you two can't do a thing together unless there's somebody over 16 or 18. This part we're gonna. Where did I skip a page? No, we're gonna go over to page 6, and this is where things are gonna get a little bit hard. What you just see the natural sinfulness of mankind. The reality is, child abuse happens, and our goal, our desire here is to mitigate as many chances or possibilities of that happening. And so this is difficult. So allegations of abuse and incident reporting. This is section 4. I want to actually kind of walk through most of these. Concerns for child safety are to be reported in accordance with procedures prescribed in this document. So um, this will be primarily noticed by adults, recognizing kind of children patterns and stuff like that. The elders of the Gateway Bible Church will not engage in denial, minimization, or blame. Our response strategy will be based on the following underlying principles. So if there's an allegation or anything like that that has come, and we have dealt with situations like this in the past, this is kind of the way that we go about handling situations. First off, any allegation, sexual allegation, is taken seriously. We don't kind of just shrug our shoulders and say, it's not that bad, or just get over it. No, if there's a situation where there's an accusation or anything, we take it seriously. Our care is for the victim and how to also handle these situations. Situations must be handled forthrightly with due respect for people's privacy and confidentiality. Full cooperation must be given to civil authorities under guidance of legal counsel. So, in other words, if it's a tough situation, um, RCMP has to be involved or legal counsel has to be involved. Yeah, we're not hiding anything. We are full participants in any sort of guidance that they would give to us, and we will give as much care as we possibly can for anybody who's a victim or things like that. So that's kind of how we go about it. We don't need to go into details of how we can, but we have had situations where we've had to kind of walk through these things and giving as much care to the victim and as much counsel and help that we can give to the person who's being accused, um, and those types of things. So, any questions before we kind of get into section 3? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So, what do you mean by you have permission? Oh, just Oh, just to babysit. If the parents have okayed it, and basically they're asking you to babysit while there's adult Sunday school going on, um, then and there's windows and doors. I would try to avoid like maybe babysit up here where there's a lot more traffic because downstairs there's not any traffic during that time. Although during Sunday school, when that's happening, um, then that would be fine. But um, generally, if there's nobody downstairs and you're alone with this child, I would recommend either a mom or dad down there for your safety, or hanging out with them up here. Okay. What do you mean? Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Being up here, like walking around with the kid up here, is fine. Right. Yeah. That's for your protection. Yes. An allegation is like an accusation. Yeah. Any other questions before we go on to section 3? All right. Programs for nursery and preschool aged children must provide a sign-in sheet and maintain an accurate sign-in procedure, including child's names, parents' names, location during that period of time, any special needs. We have that downstairs. If you go down to our nursery, there's that clipboard. It's got phone numbers that you have to give, kids' names, all those types of things. A child will only be released to a parent who's been approved. So that's that bracelet thing, right? Even nursery kids have whatever color. If a parent comes to get that child and they don't have the bracelet, the nursery workers should not release that child to that person. Even if you're like, oh, I know this, like, for example, going back to they wouldn't give me my children and they know me, which was the right thing to do for that Sunday school worker. I needed to have, so I had to come back upstairs, get the bracelet from Karen, go back downstairs, and they're like, oh, yeah, you can take your kids because you have, like, that thing is key. And so, especially even you two, you guys are going to be working in the nursery primarily. That's something that you're just going to have to watch. You don't give a kid back to parents without that bracelet. Yeah. So, children, I don't know if we have. Yeah, that's coming into September. That'd be smart, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So what happens on what you can do, like the bracelet doesn't have to be like on that sheet, there actually should be a section on that sheet that said, so say Lexi was in the nursery. And I would mark in Lexi, I would use her name, Karen's phone number, and then I would mark down on that sheet color red for the bracelet. So then I can hang up the bracelet where the kids aren't going to eat it and choke on it or whatever. But then I know, oh, Karen came down with the red bracelet, and I know that Lexi is connected to red. So then we can make like that's how you can do that rather than having, because yeah, the kids are going to eat on, choke on. Now you got a choking hazard. It's not great. Yeah. So that needs to start now. And that's not, I mean, the nursery overseer is in charge of that. That's not really your responsibility, but you're in the nursery, you should be aware that this is how it goes. The responsibility ultimately will fall on the adult that's in there, but you guys can help by reminding and those types of things. So children are never to be dropped off in the nursery or classroom without a teacher or caregiver present. In other words, don't just walk up to the nursery and drop off your kid and walk away. That's not okay. Because the bracelet thing, the marking down of names, all those types of things, which means I have a little note in mine. Nursery workers, and I'm going to speak to specifically nursery. If you are specifically the adult, but even you guys, working in the nursery on any given Sunday, you need to be there minimum of like 20 minutes beforehand. Minimum. Well, you're never a problem because you're my kid, so I force you to get there. A minimum of 20 minutes beforehand, because parents are coming in, they're trying to get settled, ready for church, and then what happens is, well, there's nobody in the nursery, and so now that just causes problems. And so nursery workers, minimum of 20 minutes beforehand, you should be there. If you can be there earlier, great, but 20 minutes has got to be that. Okay, jumping over to page 7. Staffing, supervision guidelines, ratios, and age expectations. Volunteers between the ages of 12 and 18 may be used. However, they must be paired with an adult volunteer. Right? Makes sense. You guys are 12. You can't do this alone. You have to have somebody with you who's an adult over 18. As a general rule, there is to be a minimum of 2 workers in any room with nursery, preschool, and elementary children, except in the event of emergency situations, bathroom situations, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. But there will be a minimum of 1 worker for every 4 to 6 preschool children and 1 for every 8 to 10 children in grades 1 to 4. And then I think when you get up to youth, it's slightly different as well. That's just kind of the ratios that we need. So it tells you how much we need people to volunteer and to step into these roles. Like 1 worker for every 4 to 6 children. Well, if you have 30 kids in Sunday school, right, you need 5. You need at least 5 people willing to be there. So this is the value of volunteering. This is why we need people to step in, or else we can't run these programs. We can't run these things that are so valuable to our kids. The nursery may be staffed with 1 approved adult because of its location with high visibility, and we don't have a half open door, but we have that window that opens. Not only that, but also the window in the door. So sight lines are very visible, and it's kind of right in a central location. Provided a 1 to 4 ratio is maintained, and there are no children who are not yet walking. So if you've got a bunch of kids who can't walk, you need 1 adult per 4 in that situation. So if you have 8 kids, you need 2 people. You always have to have 2 kids no matter what. But as you get bigger. Children ages 12 and up who have been cleared by the screening committee, that's you two, and anybody who's watching this afterwards, who have been cleared by the committee may serve as a second worker up to a maximum of 8 children. If there are more than 8 children, a second adult must be in. That makes sense? So if you have 9 children, you have to have at least 2 people over the age of 18. Okay? You guys can still be in there helping and playing and doing what you want to do, but if there's 9 children, you have to have at least another one there. Unobstructed sight lines, you got to be able to see into all the rooms where children are going to be. That's mandatory. Supervisory staff. The supervisory staff should make regular visits to the classroom to make sure the class is properly staffed and supervised. So that's for Sunday school intake. That person also then can do a walk and look into the rooms and stuff like that and say, yeah, things are going okay. Portion 3 on page 7, proper displays of affection. This might sound like an odd one, but kids need a display of affection. Physical contact with children should be age and developmentally appropriate. We're not saying never, ever, ever touch kids, but there's appropriate, good ways, and there's very inappropriate ways. And I want to walk through those. They're kind of listed on 3.1 and 3.2. We don't have to walk through all of them, but taking a child's hand and leading them to an activity, that's fine. A gentle touch on the chin to get their attention, grabbing both. If you have to get their attention for something, like grabbing hands, or a touch on the chin to say, hey, you need to look at me as I give you instruction. Side hugs are touch and go, they're not really that great, but shoulders, those types of things. Use discretion when it comes to dealing with children that way. If a child is crying, like a child in the nursery is crying, picking them up and comforting and holding them, that's appropriate, right? They're crying, right? Do not. 3.2, inappropriate touching. Okay? Kissing, coaxing a kid to kiss you, extended hugging, tickling, don't do it. That's just a hard no. Touching a child in any area that would be covered by a bathing suit, that's a hard no. Uh, Having like older kids like sitting on your lap and those types of things, there's all of a sudden it becomes very inappropriate. Any physical contact of any kind that is done um, for satisfaction or care to the providers is not okay. Like affectionate touching, not okay. Um, Prolonged physical contact, those types of things, don't do them. And you know, like it's part of this is common sense, but it also needs to just be said. Just don't do it. We're going to talk about discipline here in a second. There's a proper way to discipline, and an improper way to discipline. In fact, at the last page on in your book is going to have kind of our little bit of a discipline policy. So I'm not going to go through that, but you can read that at your own time. That's the last page of this document here. Discipline is good. If you read Hebrews chapter 12, like God disciplines the child that he loves. And our job is not to spank children or anything like that. Physical, like hitting, not okay when it comes to discipline. Getting attention if there's a child who's acting out in the nursery or will not, or even in Sunday school, grabbing a hand and saying, "Hey, you need to trying to redirect their attention. You will never hit a kid. You'll never spank a kid. Any of those types of things that's not up to you. If you cannot, through the guidelines that we've tried to give, ultimately, you might just have to go get their parents and say, hey, you can do what you can by trying to redirect, gain attention, console, whatever's happening to suppress the situation. But if they're just, I have 4 kids. It happens. Sometimes they just lose their mind and they just keep going and going. At that point, you just go get mom and dad and say, hey. It gets a little bit more different when you get to youth ministry. I've had the opportunity to break up a couple of fist fights, so that's always fun. So you can deal with teenage boys a little more different than you can deal with like a 6-year-old boy. So nursery children, this is washroom guidelines. This is page 9. Page 9. As a general rule, parents will be called in to change diapers generally. However, we can understand that might not be possible depending on any circumstance. So if you have to change a kid's diaper, it's not behind a closed door. It's kind of open. I think we have change tables in the bathroom. That bathroom door stays open, and the other workers can observe what's going on just to make sure there's no inappropriate touching as you're changing a child, but you're just generally changing a diaper. But in an ideal world, a parent would be asked to come down, change the diaper, and then that would be good. Preschoolers who can go to the bathroom on their own as an adult or maybe even a younger volunteer. So if you guys are, I don't know, if there's a situation where a kid has to go to the bathroom, you escort them to the bathroom, and then you don't go in the bathroom with them, but you stand outside, wait for them to do their thing, and then you can escort them back. Never, under any circumstances, be alone with a child in an unsupervised washroom, and never go into the washroom stall with a kid. That is an absolute hard no. And like it or not, the vast majority of people who are going to abuse children in an inappropriate way are men. That's kind of statistically, it's likely going to be men. So if possible, having a woman walk that child, male or female, to the bathroom is better than having a male do it. That's just a protection. Once again, vast majority of these situations, the ugly situations, happen with men. So, and we do downstairs, we have cameras that like aim right down. So we have a camera that aims right down this hallway. You can see all the bathrooms and down that hallway as well. So all access points to bathrooms are covered by cameras as well. So that's a safeguard for us. But yeah, never, ever, ever go into a cubicle or a bathroom stall with a kid. In the very rare event, and I think we have it listed here, where there's something awful happens in that bathroom stall and somebody needs some help, because it could happen, that adult who is on the outside of the washroom will go find another adult to come, and then we'll be able to supervise if anything has to happen that way. It can happen, so we want to make sure that we are being above board. We want to, as the Bible says, flee all appearances of evil. And so that's kind of washroom guidelines. Any questions or comments on that as we continue going forward? Yeah. No, just avoid piggyback rides. With people of the opposite sex, just avoid. I think we have that written down somewhere. Opposite sex piggyback rides are a no. Don't do it. So it's, once again, these are just things we have to. Sadly, in the world that we live, this is a reality. So don't do it. Health and safety guidelines. Sick children, don't let them in. To a point, like a little sniffle or whatever, but a child who is ill could therefore expose other children and workers to illness, should not be received into children's ministry. We don't want to get other people sick. One of the worst things that can come through is something called hand, foot, and mouth disease. If your child has hand, foot, and mouth, keep them home. In fact, we've had children go through it. It sucks, and it's super contagious. So if you know that your kid has hand, foot, mouth, just keep them home. Because then what happens, they come and hypothetically they go into the nursery, they infect all the toys, and the nursery workers get the joy of washing and disinfecting every toy in that place, and it's not fun. However, that being said, nursery specifically, because let's be honest, kids are gross, right? They got germs and snot, and that happens. The toys in the nursery are washed on a fairly regular basis, just to try to keep that clean. You are not to give any medication to any child, ever. That is mom and dad's responsibility. So do not give, or if a parent said, hey, can you give my kid this pill at this time? The answer is no. That parent, if they need a pill, sometimes kids are on medication or whatever, which is good, that parent will come and give that kid the medication and then go back upstairs. That is not your responsibility. That is a lawsuit just waiting to happen. So don't do that. If any incident requiring emergency aid occurs, provide the appropriate immediate care required. Call 911. Advise the children's parents as soon as possible, and notify the ministry leader, who will in turn advise a pastor or an elder. Kid falls, having a tug of war downstairs for Sunday school, kid falls, breaks their arm, right? That's a call mom and dad, got to get them to the hospital, like those types of things. Those kind of emergency procedures, that's what we do. We do have an emergency evacuation sheet, I believe, in all the rooms. There's one upstairs, there's one in the nursery, and there's one downstairs as well. In case of a fire or something like that, you follow the emergency evacuation and you get out of the building. Questions, comments before I jump over to number 7 in page 11? Yes. What about it? Like if a kid cuts himself and is bleeding, like that, right? Clean it, put a Band-Aid on it. There should be first aid kits. There's a first aid kit here in the kitchen. There should be one in the nursery as well for things like that, right? Give them a Band-Aid. And then there's also things like incident reports that we have to fill out if something really bad happens. I've had to fill out a few. Usually in youth ministry, that's when all the incident reports really start to come out. We've had concussions, we've had broken ankles, we've had stuff happens. So, okay. Suspicious behavior. Some conduct just deserves counsel and advice from a supervisor, while other conduct requires reporting. See incident reporting procedures, and we have some of those. Ministry workers, this is 7.3. Ministry workers should note when a youth or child appears aloof or withdrawn or exhibits a marked change in personality. So you've got someone who is, this won't likely happen with like nursery workers, but as you get into kind of youth ministry, you get someone who's normally happy, bubbly, kind of life of the party, joyful, and then all of a sudden for a long stretch of time, there seems to be sadness, maybe some depression. There's a few ways we can go about doing that, asking them how are they doing, are things going okay at home. If there's some suspected, usually because what happens is there is some sort of abuse going on at home, that's going to be significant change in just kind of who they are. And so being aware of those types of things is really important, and then bringing them up. So Section 4, understanding child abuse. Physical abuse is using physical force or action that results or could result in injury to child or youth. It is more than reasonable discipline. So in other words, sometimes, we've talked about it already, sometimes kids need to be, discipline needs to happen, right? That's a reality. Kids act out for many different reasons. Sometimes discipline needs to happen. Physical discipline beyond a trying to adjust, maybe, we talked about it already, like readjust their thoughts as far as like holding a hand or grabbing a chin or kind of grabbing their shoulders to say, hey, like let's stop. Anything kind of beyond that is kind of a no. There is no physical discipline that is going to be needed. Emotional abuse, understanding what that is, includes verbal attacks on the child, insults, humiliation, or rejection. A child or youth who is emotionally harmed may demonstrate severe anxiety, depression, withdrawal, self-destructive, or aggressive behavior. So once again, we're going to see a little bit more of that in the youth ministry realm. So if you're starting to see those signs come through kids and youth, that's maybe something that you just want to pay attention to, maybe have a conversation with them, maybe alert myself, and just that way we can, if there is emotional abuse or physical abuse going on in the home, we can address it that way. Sexual abuse occurs when a child or youth is used by someone else for sexual gratification. Activity between children or youth may also be sexual abuse if the older is more powerful child or youth takes sexual advantage over those who are younger and less powerful. Basically, sexual abuse is somewhat self-explanatory. Anything that one person uses for sexual desires, for which somebody else does not want that, that's sexual abuse, and that's a serious one, and we will take that very seriously. Once again, that's going to show up in a child's life if they're being sexually abused at home or anything like that. That's going to start to show up in different areas, from extra aggressiveness to aloofness to anything like that. So being aware of those types of things is key. And neglect. Neglect is the failure of those responsible for the care of the child to meet the physical, emotional, or medical needs of a child to an extent that the child's health, development, or safety is endangered. Basically, neglect is somebody who's responsible for this child and just kind of puts them off to the side and doesn't give them what they need to live and to survive. They're neglected. They kind of are on their own when they're not capable of being on their own. Those are kind of the 4 key abuses that can happen. And let us not think like those types of things can't happen in our church. Section 2 on page 12. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Consent is never a defense against sexual abuse involving a minor. And what that means is, if somebody is over the age of 18 and they have sexual contact with someone who is under the age of 18, but that person who's 16 says, yes, this is good, that's still sexual abuse. Somebody who's over the age of 18 and somebody who's under the age of, and consent is not well, they consented to it, so it's fine. No, it's still sexual abuse. So that's what that means. Thanks, Matt, for pointing that out. Number 2 on page 12, understanding and reducing the risk. Gateway Bible Church has a mandate to minister to individuals, families, adults, youth, and children. In that context, The church stresses the sanctity of human life and the importance and worth of each individual as a child of God. Physical and sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect are on the, as we say, is on the rise. It's not getting less; it's getting more, and it's heartbreaking to see. And if we think it's not going to happen in our church, it will and it can. This is supposed to be a safe place to be a kid, and so we're going to get to that in a minute. Why churches are susceptible to these types of things. Incidents of molestation can occur in any church, including ours. So we have to be vigilant. We have to be looking out for signs. We have to be putting everything we can in place to protect our kids and to recognize if something's going on in someone's home, that we can maybe address that or types of. And we're going to get into what that looks like in a little bit here, but we need to be aware that could absolutely happen in our church. Be aware of the signs and bring it to the proper authorities, whether that's a pastor, elder, or beyond that. So it can happen. So the moment we think it can't happen to us is when it's going to happen. We need to be very vigilant in making sure that we're looking out for these types of things. The profile of a child molester or an abuser. I think most of us grew up, at least in our day and age. When I was a young kid, it was stranger danger, right? Don't talk to strangers because they're going to hurt you and they're going to do all these things to you. And that is still generally a good, safe, true rule. However, and the heartbreaking thing is most abuse of children happens to them by people that they know. The vast majority, whether that's a pastor, whether that's a trusted leader, whether that's an uncle or something like that, most abuse happens between an adult that is actually trusted by the family, which is hard. If abuse occurs in our church, statistically speaking, a respected member will most likely be the one who abuses. Someone who everyone would look at and be like, I can't imagine them doing that. Statistically, that's who's done it. Once again, that's a hard truth, but it's the reality of the world that we live in and what we're growing up in. So the question is, why are churches susceptible? Why are churches seem to be an easy target for why child abusers want to step into church? One, there's lots of children in church, right? The access to children, because there's lots of young families with young children, the access is just there. Child molesters are attracted to an institution in which they have immediate access to potential victims in an atmosphere of complete trust. People come to church and they kind of let their guard down. Oh, you're in church, I can trust you. Right? It's that kind of mentality. And so that's kind of why churches are an easy target. So child molesters will come in and start hanging out and being happy and joyful and participate in certain things, and there's an immediate kind of safe built-in trust at the church, and that's why. The other thing is need, and we notice that here. We need people to step into children's ministry, and so someone who's a child molester will walk into the church. There's lots of children, and you need help in children's ministry? I'll volunteer for children. I can do that, right? And now you've got yourself in a situation where you're putting children at risk, and that's why we have certain things in place. In order to work in children's ministry, you have to have been here for a year, a regular adherent, and you have to go through all of these steps. Because statistically speaking, if a child molester has to walk through all of these steps to get access, they're just going to go somewhere else where it's easier. That's why a year. That's why this training. That's why the criminal record check. That's why all of these things are in place to deter that. But churches are susceptible because of access and because of need. And so that's why we need to be very, very diligent. Section 6. Questions? Anyone? Comments? Section 6. Incident reporting procedures. So there's a lot that can go into here, and this is not a perfect science by any means. But any person who has reasonable and probable grounds to believe and believes that a child is in need of protective services shall forthwith report the matter to local police or child intervention services for intervention. So if there's a legitimate, like, this kid is being abused at home, that needs to be reported for the safety of that child. You can look at some other things there. If any person has any concerns regarding the safety of children, it will be immediately reported to the ministry leader. So if there's a concern, if you think, man, all of these signs are kind of pointing to where something might be going on at home, that immediately needs to be told to that ministry leader. So for nursery, that would be, I believe, Sandy Fair. If it happens in youth, that would be reported to me, at which point, in these matters, this is top of 15, it is important to keep the information restricted to those who need to be advised. Suspicions of abuse should therefore initially only be reported to the ministry leader, and then it becomes our responsibility as ministry leaders to go ahead, inform RCMP if needed, and those types of things. We're at the top of 15. That's kind of our responsibility at that point. So, yes, sir. Yeah. Yep. As I was reading it now, I noticed that. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I don't know. So I'm going to take this as that first paragraph is written to ministry leaders. We need to clarify that in this document. Top paragraph. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, because for example, I'm thinking you two, right? If you suspect something, you're not going to go ahead and call the RCMP, right? You would go ahead and you would tell Sandy, say, hey, this seems odd or whatever. At which point Sandy would then report, I believe, it then becomes the person's responsibility to advise a pastor or elders. Then that ministry leader tells the pastors and elders, and now we, ultimately, the persons or people reporting to the RCMP are the pastors and elders. We are the ones contacting them. And so that is our responsibility. That is not your responsibility. So I think paragraph 1 of section 6 is to kind of pastors, elders, and whatnot. Everybody else kind of goes up that chain, and then we have the responsibility to care for that child that way. When an allegation occurs, the ministry leader will communicate the incident immediately to a pastor. If a pastor is not immediately available, an elder would be advised without delay. Elder, pastor, it's our responsibility to then go ahead and contact RCMP, Child Intervention Services. Like we then take it that way, and that's officially, once you've kind of shared that with the elders, that your responsibility is done. You have done your due diligence. You have done your responsibility. Now it's up to us. Do not attempt to interview with suspected offender. Leave the investigation to the proper authorities. Immediate suspension of duties shall result when a church worker is suspected of child abuse and reasonable evidence exists as to his or her alleged involvement until a complete investigation and decision has been made. If the alleged offender is a paid member of the church, that would be Pastor Matt and myself, the Board of Elders will make a decision to maintain or suspend his income until the allegations are cleared or substantiated. So elders will basically say, okay, you're basically on probation or you're gone. They'll deal with it that way. If it's Matt or myself. Then there's some legal stuff that goes on. The AGC superintendent will be informed. If it's a pastor, the AGC will be then informed of that as well. So Treat the suspected offender with dignity and support. We focus a lot on the victim, and rightly so. But our desire is also that the person, this is 16, that the one who's being accused would also get the care. Our desire would that person would recognize their sin, repent, and come into right relationship with the Lord. And so that's the desire. And so, response to the child. When the child first comes, so if a child comes to you and says, hey, this is what's happening, right? Be sure to take his or her words seriously. Do not deny the problem. Stay calm and just listen. At that point, you're just listening to them. Yes. If it's like, if a parent, hypothetically, if like a mom is like, this is what my husband is doing, right? Something like that. So if it's not just the child, but maybe the mom, it comes as well, or maybe the mom and dad come because it's an uncle or something like that. Give emotional support, reminding the child he or she is not at fault, and that they were right in disclosing, like you did the right, brave thing in coming to me and telling me, because that's a very hard thing for victims to do. Do not, and I repeat, do not promise that no one will be told. That's often because, specifically working in youth ministry, I have teenagers, not often, but I have teenagers come to my office and say, hey, can I tell you something that you can't tell anybody else? My answer is no. No. Sometimes, sure, if what they tell, like, and I say no, and then they go ahead and tell me, well, okay, we can keep this between us. It's not, but if it's, hey, my father is abusing me, I have a legal responsibility before the Lord and before the land to basically go ahead and say, this is what's happening in this home. So you will never tell a child that you won't say anything. There's things that you legally have to tell the proper authorities for the protection of that child. So workers should never interview the child in detail or suggest to the child that they have been abused. Don't put those thoughts in their head. Have you been? Have you been? Have you been? And poking and prodding. Eventually, you'll convince them that they have been, even if they haven't, and then that's a whole world of trouble. The Board of Elders are required to immediately report to the local law enforcement and child intervention services any suspected case of child abuse. We will never keep that to ourselves. For the sake of that child, the health of that child, and those types of things. We're not going to sit here and keep that to ourselves. There's texts that go along with that, and you can read those later. Jumping over page 17. Church follow-up and discipline. If it is confirmed after notifying authorities that child abuse by a member of the church has taken place, the church will practice discipline according to Matthew 18. We have a whole policy on church discipline, but that's what's going to happen. If a member of the Gateway Bible Church has been accused and found guilty, then there's a whole process of what that looks like, not only for within the church. A designated spokesperson from the screening committee should serve as the only spokesperson for any allegation. So if comes a situation where we actually have to talk to the media or anything like that, there will be one person and one person only who speaks on behalf of the church. That person is on the screening committee, and that person will speak to the media if that ever should happen. Not you, not the ministry leaders, not the workers, but that one person from the screening committee. Yes. That would be a long process to figure out how that all works out. The desire would that there would be genuine repentance and a coming back to the faith, and those types of things. But that's not an easy yes no. That's a little bit of a longer process. Questions as we go? Thanks. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if there's a hard and fast like this is it. So for those of you online who didn't maybe hear the question was there's a lot of in this document about if you suspect it, report it kind of thing. But where's that line? Because if there's a false allegation brought, um, you know, play this out in a hypothetical situation. Somebody accuses me of abusing a teenager, um, and if that's a false allegation, even that allegation will then ruin my ministry, and I will never be a pastor again because of even if it's a false allegation. That's how damning uh, this types of thing is. And so, where's that line? Um, I don't know. I think that's why we ministry leaders report to the elders, and then I think the elders kind of take the take that as a situation, and then um, we kind of navigate that a little bit, and perhaps uh, one conversation goes to the authorities and say, "Hey, here's kind of our situation. We don't know what's true, what's not. Like this is kind of what we're how what should we do?" Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, 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 yeah. So for those of you who didn't hear, once again online, page 15 at the top is a key thing. In matters, it is important to keep the information restricted to those who need to be advised. Suspicions of abuse should therefore initially be reported to the ministry leader, and the ministry leader then takes it to the elders, and then the elders do their due diligence to navigate what kind of the next steps of how do we, if we have to report it, we'll 100% report it. Absolutely. We're not hiding anything. We're not minimizing what's going on, but we want to make sure that we're kind of protecting all that are involved for their future. So yeah, and it's a case by case basis. I think it's not a hard line, but we want to be um, wise as serpents and innocent as doves, as they say. So section 7, page 18. We are getting to the end there, folks. To protect minors in our care and to be protected from liability, the church must take reasonable action in screening and supervising the workers involved in any children's work. We do everything, kind of this whole process is this right here: screening, training, teaching, certain policies and rules in place, like not being here for a year, and those types of things are all doing our best to kind of supervise, to screen who's going to be involved in children's ministry. Uh, Ministry leaders should submit names of potential recruits to the screening committee prior to approaching them. Uh, if so, we do screening committee slash kind of elders a little bit. So for me as a youth guy, uh, all of our youth leaders have walked through the CYPP training. They've got all of their stuff. But anybody new, like we have somebody new coming on this year, I've talked to the elders, and this person has walked through the CYPP. They've been in front of the screening committee. They've got their thing. And then I actually approach the elders and say, hey, I'd like this person to step into youth ministry. And then they also give kind of the stamp of, yeah, I think that would be a good step. So that's just another check and balance to make sure that we are putting right people in the right place. So you see on there reference checks. So you want to step into kids ministry for the first time. You're going to be you're going to pay attention to this video, or you're going to be here. You're going to fill out the application form. You're going to get a criminal record check. You're going to sit in front of a screening committee as we ask you about your testimony. We want to hear that you're actually a believer in Jesus Christ. We're going to ask you things about, have you done any children's ministry in the past? What churches have you been involved with? And we're actually going to ask for 3 references as well when it comes to that. We want 3 references that we, as a screening committee, actually all call. We call the reference and say, hey, you know Carissa Flutman. Can you tell me about her? Oh, well, she's great. Excellent, thanks. Or, nope, she's awful. We'll be like, okay, thanks, right? So we do call those references, and so we want to make sure we're doing our due diligence there. I have all the records as far as vulnerable sector checks, who needs new criminal record checks and who's good, who's been approved, who hasn't been approved. Like, I've got kind of all those records, and that's me. And then we also do training, and that's what we're doing here today. Just when you come into, and this is kind of the last thing we're going to end on, when you're stepping into children's ministry or stepping into any ministry, you want to just pray for a general wisdom. You want to walk in wisdom in all of these situations. And I want to kind of finish with maybe this text here. James chapter 1. I want you to hear what he is writing to the kind of the 12 tribes in dispersion. They're gone, and he says in verse 5. He says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him." When we have a situation of potential abuse, or you're suspecting something, rather than just running ahead on your own gut feeling or emotion, pause and ask the Lord to grant wisdom. And Lord, how do I discern what's happening? How do I move forward in this situation? What's the wisest way to go? We want to walk in wisdom when it comes to just general life, ministry, and especially when it comes to situations like what we've been talking about today. And so, any final questions from those who are here? As minors, you might have to. You might have to sit in front of the screening committee briefly. You don't have to do criminal record checks because you're minors. There'd be nothing on you anyway, and they can't tell us. So, but I do believe you do have to sit in front of the screening committee. I'll let you know. I can't remember if they have to or not as minors. I think they do, because I know we've done minors before. So the only thing I know, I'll get back to you on that, but the only thing I know for sure is that you don't have a criminal record check. So, any other questions, comments? So I would encourage you, those online, to come to the church, pick up a document. Those who are here, actually, so obviously you notice I didn't read through every line. Read through it. I know if you're having a hard time falling asleep, read through it. But if you have any questions on some of the things that maybe I didn't touch on, if you want clarity, just come back and let me know. And I would be happy to go ahead and do those. So if that's it, if I can get you to close there, right, Reverend Martins, that would be great.